Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to lay out the major problems facing Ireland in the event of the Mad Hatter in number 10 succeeding in taking the UK out of the EU without a deal. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, as 2018 ended, it became clear that the withdrawal agreement that the UK government had agreed with the EU was not going to pass smoothly through Westminster and ran the very real prospect of not getting through at all, something that has now transpired, and that raised the very serious prospect of a no-deal Brexit. So in early 2019, the Irish government produced a report which showed that the country would suffer a 7% hit to growth in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Ireland isn't just a neighbour with the UK in the same way as, say, France or the Netherlands, for example. There are a lot of people either side of the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland who rely on free movement of both goods and themselves for their livelihoods. The vast majority of the impact was centred around 5 areas: agriculture, pharmaceuticals, electrical machinery, retail and air transport. But then you also have to consider other social aspects as well. For example, if an ambulance is called, well, there are times when an ambulance comes from Northern Ireland to the Republic and vice versa. All of that breaks down in the event of a no-deal Brexit. But in terms of the ones that have the major economic impact, I mean, air transport, for example, seems to remain one of those areas that people keep letting slip under the radar, if you'll pardon the expression. Too many people think of a no-deal Brexit as related just to the borders and passage of people and goods across them. But there are a whole host of agreements that we have with the EU on extremely important matters that are not just in the public mind. You know, retail also doesn't get mentioned enough in the press. Retail relies upon what is termed just-in-time supply chains. Any hold-up anywhere in the UK or EU poses an existential threat to many retailers whose profit margins may be too tight to weather the storm. The report estimates that about 55,000 Irish jobs would be lost within 2 years of what they call a disorderly Brexit, and another 30,000 over the next decade. Now, my first thought when I read the report half a year ago was, it was EU countries that have already been putting in serious efforts to minimise a no-deal exit, something the UK still hasn't done even now. So I'm going to assume that that reduction in growth of 7% is taking into account those contingency plans, which just shows how limited they can be. Then last month, the Irish government released another report. It began by pointing out the measures they'd already taken to protect themselves from the effects of an economic crisis on the scale of a decade ago. The Irish government, of course, suffered very badly from 2008 crash. It noted the uncertainty attached to the potential of a no-deal Brexit, but also made predictions of growth based on the UK remaining in the customs union and single market for 2020 at least. Now, Boris Johnson has recently said that he wants to do this. He said he wants us to leave the EU in October, but he wants us to remain within the customs union and single market for a transition period. I mean, it's not impossible to leave the EU and remain in the customs union and single market for a specified amount of time. That is, after all, the transition period that is already in the withdrawal agreement. But the problem is that there is no agreement. We can't just have this arrangement based on a nod and a wink. A legal document has to be agreed by all heads of government and ratified by the various parliaments. In other words, to get a transition period, we need a withdrawal agreement. And guess what? That withdrawal agreement needs a permanent mechanism to ensure that an invisible border within Ireland is maintained. And that's the thing that Boris Johnson won't countenance, and indeed Parliament in general. So although the report does note that their predictions are in tatters if we leave without a deal, I do think the wording is sort of putting too much faith in the UK government. To be fair, when the report was written, Theresa May had only just resigned and much of the work was probably done by then. They may not have known what we know now, but it was fairly predictable, I think. The Fiscal Assessment report, also published in June 2019, described the likelihood of a disorderly Brexit as medium, though the impact is severe. Now, that might be a fair assessment. It is easy at the moment to think that we're almost certain to be leaving. That's not necessarily true. Although Boris Johnson and his cronies are going full tilt at a no-deal Brexit like a whole gaggle of Don Quixotes, Westminster is equally determined to stop him from doing so. Much depends on who emerges the victor in a battle between Parliament and the government. Now, as well as upsetting people in the north of England and Scotland, Boris Johnson has also been visiting Northern Ireland on his prime ministerial tour of the country. He has been warned that that Northern Ireland could break away from the UK if he goes ahead with his plans. I mean, sure, of course it could. It certainly increases the likelihood, just as there would be renewed calls for Scotland to do the same. After all, one of David Cameron's rallying cries in the previous referendum was that Scotland, as part of the Union, was a strong member of the EU. Now, with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, the plan is to completely knacker that benefit. Frankly, it's only a shame that the north of England won't have the option of joining them. But the thing is that it solves nothing, Northern Ireland reunifying at this point. I mean, the reunification of Ireland is going to happen at some point in the next generation anyway. If the decision is brought forward, it does nothing at all to reduce the devastation caused by a no-deal Brexit. It's the most ludicrous case of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted that I can imagine. First of all, there'd have to be strong evidence that a tipping point had been reached and that Northern Ireland wishes to reunify. So that means polling. That would take a few months at the very least. I don't know how long realistically, but it's got to take a few months. Then a referendum needs to be issued. Now, that's a legal process. You could easily be talking the best part of a year before a result is even reached. Plenty of time for permanent damage to be done to other communities. Well, in fact, communities either side of the Irish border. Then you need to legally cut and paste Northern Ireland from the UK to the Republic of Ireland. Bear in mind that the UK couldn't even copy and paste its own laws with references to the EU just being removed in 2 whole years. How long might it take for Ireland to do this when the laws aren't all the same? So now, the only way to avoid disaster in Ireland, the whole of Ireland, is by stopping the lunatic in number 10, unfortunately. The good news is that Parliament should be stronger than the government. We don't have to worry about self-serving MPs more worried about their seats than the country. Almost all opposition MPs are in a position to be able to do their political future some good and the country at the same time. There's no real conflict there. The conflict is really on the part of Tory MPs, but there are enough of those who are willing to end their political careers for the sake of the country to make this happen. But if Parliament can't enforce its will, then we are looking at Ireland suffering almost as much economically as the UK. Obviously, the UK will suffer more. But where Ireland is concerned, of course, it's not just about economics. The fragile peace, which has existed for 20 years, is likely to effectively go up in smoke in the event of a no-deal Brexit. In fact, almost certain, quite frankly. But that is another issue, though no less serious. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.